Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for tuning in to today's 9 o'clock morning greeting. My name is Zainab, and today is Sunday, June 13th, 2021. On Channel 3 today for our virtual activities, at 10:30 is Rosary, and at 4:30 is Sunday Replay Music History. So tune into those programs on Channel 3 today. So what happened today in history? Today on June 13th in 323 BC, Alexander the Great dies. Alexander the Great, the young Macedonian military genius who forged an empire stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to India, dies in Babylon in present-day Iraq at the age of 33. Born in Macedonia to King Philip II and Queen Olympias, Alexander received a classical education from famed philosopher Aristotle and a military education from his father. At the age of 16, Alexander led his first troops into combat, and 2 years later commanded a large part of his father's army that won the Battle of Chaeronea and brought Greece under Macedonian rule. In 336 BC, Philip II was assassinated and Alexander ascended to the throne. 2 years later, the young king led a large army into Asia Minor to carry out his father's plans for conquering Persia. Consistently outnumbered in his battles against superior Persian forces, Alexander displayed an unprecedented understanding of strategic military planning and tactical maneuvers. He never lost a single battle, and by 330 BC, all of Persia and Asia Minor was under his sway. Although Alexander controlled the largest empire in the history of the world, he launched a new eastern campaign soon after his return from Persia. By 327 BC, he had conquered Afghanistan, Central Asia, and northern India. In the next year, his army, exhausted after 8 years of fighting, refused to go further, and Alexander led them on a difficult journey home through the inhospitable Makrane Desert. Finally reaching Babylon, Alexander began constructing a large fleet to make his army back to Egypt. However, in June 323 BC, just as the work on his ships was reaching its conclusion, Alexander fell sick and died, perhaps earnestly believing himself to be a god, as many of his subjects did. He had not selected a successor, and within a year of his death, his army and his empire broke into a multitude of warring factions. His body was later returned to Alexandria, where it was laid to rest in a golden coffin. Also on this day, in June 13th of 1966, the Miranda rights are established. On June 13th, 1966, the Supreme Court hands down its decision to Miranda versus Arizona, establishing the principle that all criminal suspects must be advised of their rights before interrogation. Now considered standard police procedure, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Has been heard so many times in television and film dramas that it has become almost a cliche. The roots of the Miranda decision go back to March 2nd in 1963, when an 8-year-old Phoenix woman told police that she had been abducted, driven to the desert, and raped. Detectives questioning her story gave her a polygraph test, but the results were inconclusive. However, tracking the license plate number of a car that resembled that of her attackers brought police to Ernesto Miranda, who had a prior record of keeping Tom. Although the victim did not identify Miranda in a lineup, he was brought into police custody and interrogated. What happened next is disputed, but officers left the interrogation with a confession that Miranda later recanted, unaware that he didn't have to say anything at all. The confession was extremely brief and differed in certain respects from the victim's account of the crime. However, Miranda's appointed defense attorney, who was paid a grand total of $100, didn't call any witnesses at the ensuing trial, and Miranda was convicted. While Miranda was in Arizona State Prison, the American Civil Liberties Union took up his appeal, claiming that the confession was false and coerced. The Supreme Court overturned his conviction, but Miranda was retried and convicted in October in 1966 anyways. Despite the relative lack of evidence against him, remaining in prison until 1972, Ernesto Miranda was later stabbed to death in the men's room of a bar after a poker game in January 1976. As a result of the case against Miranda, each and every person must now be informed of his or her rights when in custody and about to be interrogated. Also on this day in 1983, on June 13th, Pioneer 10 departs solar system. After more than a decade in space, Pioneer 10, the world's first outer planetary probe, leaves the solar system. The next day, it radioed back its first scientific data on interstellar space. On March 2nd, 1972, the NASA spacecraft was launched from Cape Canaveral, Florida, on a mission to Jupiter, the solar system's largest planet. In December 1973, after successfully negotiating the asteroid belt and a distance of 620 miles, Pioneer 10 reached Jupiter and sent back to Earth the first close-up images of the spectacular gas giant. On June 13, 1983, the NASA spacecraft left the solar system. NASA officially ended the Pioneer 10 project on March 31st in 1997, with the spacecraft having traveled a distance of some 6 billion miles. Headed in the direction of the Taurus constellation, Pioneer 10 will pass within 3 light years of another star, Ross 246, in the year 34,600 AD. Bolted to the probe's exterior wall is a gold anodized plaque, 6 by 9 inches in area, that displays a drawing of a human man and woman, a star map marked with the location of the sun, and another map showing the flight path of Pioneer 10. The plaque, intended for the intelligent life forms elsewhere in the galaxy, was designed by astronomer Carl Sagan. So those were today's happenings in history. Again, today is Sunday, June 13th, 2021. On this day in Channel 3, we will have Rosary At 10:30 and at 4:30 is Music History, which is going to be a Sunday replay. So again, those are on Channel 3 today for today's virtual activities. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next greeting.